Hey you guys, how is it going? Welcome to another video. If you are new or if you are returning, I'm glad to have you here. Here we have very casual chit chats about basically whatever I'm kind of moving through, like things that are on my mind. Typically it has to do with personal development, existentialism, manifestation, really anything that helps us create a better life, a better reality. So yeah, we don't really limit ourselves here, so if there's ever anything you want to chat about or discuss, let me know and we can definitely go into it. Today, I really want to talk about like boundaries and pulling the energy back to yourself and things like that. And I think this will kind of overlap with like attachment styles. And I feel like that's like something that's kind of going viral right now. So you might be already familiar with like the attachment style theory, which is basically like there's three types of, well, I think there's like four technically types of attachment styles, which is like how you operate within relationships with people. And I think it's like predominantly romantic relationships, right? So if you're someone who's like very hyper independent and like in your own frame and tends to like kind of emotionally distance people, you're considered like an avoidant attachment style typically. If you are one of those people that kind of like leans into love and is always like seeking it and like needs a lot of validation and like typically like always needs to be in a relationship, needs a lot of reassurance and things like that, you're considered an anxious attachment style. There's a secure attachment style, which is like the healthy type. And then there's also the fearful avoidant, which is like someone who like takes a step forward in love and then gets nervous and like takes a step back. So it's kind of a mix of like both anxious and avoidant attachment styles. Personally, I think that everyone has some degree of all of these, but I feel like people kind of have a tendency to lean towards one or the other. Personally, I have been all over the board. I would say, like, to define myself most realistically, I'm a fearful avoidant, but I've been secure at times. Like, I've been completely avoidant with some people, very anxious with other people. So it depends on, like, the situation and, like, who I'm with. And I feel like everyone's kind of like this. It's just, like, that dynamic and, like, that particular situation. So I think that gives me like a good base to kind of speak to like all of the different perspectives in a well-rounded way, because I very much know firsthand like how challenging navigating this can be to the point where like I think a lot of us like don't even want to date or like be in relationships because it's so challenging to do this. And maybe that's my avoidant coming out because I'm just like you know what I mean? Like that's so much to navigate within ourselves to now like do this dance with another person. And I think it's so your romantic relationships in my experience are like so different from friendships, right? Like I mean obviously they're different, but like I just feel like friendships, for me at least, like I experience them as very light and like playful and like not heavy and usually very joyful and like pleasurable. And to me, like romance, like romantic relationships have always had like an air of like density and almost like lack or like heaviness or possessiveness. And I don't know if everyone feels that way, and I don't think it has to be this way, which is part of like why this healing is so important, and like why we talk about this. But for me, like it's always kind of been that way, and I'm curious to know if you guys feel the same. Like if like for example, if I have a person and like I'm a good friend to like with them and I'm attracted to them, like we're good friends, but it's like we're just friends. Like there's nothing happening. It's very platonic, it's light, it's playful. That's a good relationship. That's a beneficial relationship. There's nothing really, I don't know, like that crucial there, but like literally as soon as like they go into the other category of like romance, like say something happens, like someone says something, confesses feelings, something sparks, like whatever it is, immediately, like very often those relationships become very strained and heavy typically. And that could just be those particular dynamics for me. I don't know if that's something that is always the case. Maybe a secure, healthy relationship doesn't feel that way. But for me, like I've always had that association with romance is like how I view it often is like I feel like romance in like modern media and like society and like how it's often portrayed is like romance is like coming from a place of like lack energetically. Like I think so much of what we do in romance is like we externalize a piece of ourselves and like try to regain that by like now merging with this person. Like even the way people talk and like write songs, like it's like you are my other half, like there's something I need in you, there's something, it's like we've put this thing, this meaning into this person, like we pedestalize them, and it's like we only allow ourselves to feel that love once we are properly validated by them or like merged with them or you know whatever it is. But like realistically, like, we may not have felt that way before. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I feel like people always say this, like, they're like, oh, I was fine until I fell in love. Like, yeah, bitch, like, you were fine before you fell in love. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's like this weird psychological thing that we tend to do, and this almost like trap we can fall into. I'm so curious to know if anybody else is resonating with this or like notices this, because it's just something like I've really picked up on myself, I would say, like, in the past couple of years. Is getting into this sort of like limerent state of like pedestalizing people and like using them as my muse almost. So yeah, I don't know if that's like a normal thing or if that's just because I'm me and like an artist, or if it's like, I don't know where that stems from, but I feel like romance always has that kind of connotation of like a piece of me is missing and I'm trying to now seek that within somebody else. And the other thing I think like happens within romance is like, I think that we I think humans have a deep desire to like be in love and like be in romance. And I don't mean like with a person per se, but I think we use that, like romantic relationships with people, as an excuse to do this. So like I think we have a deep craving to like romanticize existence and like almost make it juicy, like make it into this poetry that it is, right? You know what I mean? Because life is so gorgeous. And I think so often, like when we're not in romance or in love, like we can almost operate in a very like mundane way where we're not romanticizing life. And I think this is shifting. Like people are talking about like the, romanticize your life and like everything. So I think this is definitely shifting, but I think that's another reason we get so attached to people, is because we end up like fixating on a specific person romantically and saying like this, and like only giving ourselves permission to feel that feeling of like romance and beauty and true deep love through that person. Like we're like using them as an excuse. And I also think we kind of like backwardsly use others as a weird excuse as a permission to love ourselves, if that makes sense. So like, in other words, like I think we love people in the way that we wish we were loved. So like, cause like imagine if you were so obsessed with like your eyes and your smile and like your voice and like your smell and like mannerisms, the way you were obsessed with the people that you fall in love with, that you fawn over, you know what I mean? Like, dude, the world would be so different. And like realistically, like I don't think most people feel that way. Like maybe at times you're like, oh, like I really appreciate this about myself, but like I don't think it's to the same extent. And so we give all of this love and appreciation towards this other person, and then I think like, when they like, if they break our heart, like walk away, like there's all this contempt then. But really I think so much of what we're feeling is like that self-abandonment, because we're like, why did they get to have that love that like I didn't receive, you know what I mean? And really you're kind of mad at yourself because you're like, why were they pedestalized? You know what I mean? Because there's so much, I think like there can be so much self-abandonment that comes in like falling in love with people. And yeah, so I think like so much of like romantic relationships do have to do with us and like personally sort of like almost withholding love from ourselves, and then using other people as an excuse to sort of regain that. Because even if we talk about scientifically, like the emotion of love itself is generated within yourself, like like scientifically speaking. So if I, for example, and I think, I mean, okay, yeah, example. So if I'm sitting here and I close my eyes and I have stage fright and I visualize like being on stage and like all of these people in front of me, I'm about to give a speech, like blah, 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 my body's actually going to start reacting. Like I'm physically going to start feeling the emotion of anxiety and fear from that experience as if it were actually happening. And that's because the body and the mind can't tell the difference between a real event and a perceived event. And so like this is the same thing with love. It's like we just use other people as an excuse to feel that within ourselves, when really it's being generated within ourselves, and we just like we don't practice cultivating that at will, I think, as much as we need to, and we certainly don't practice directing that towards ourselves. And I think that's why all of this wonkiness sort of comes about in relationships, because like really like we're supposed to be the ones giving that to ourselves. And I think that's what actually makes a healthy, secure relationship. Because like if we talk about, in my experience, if we talk about like being an anxious, like you're externalizing that love, like you're always trying to chase it, and like you only get those hits when you feel validated. So like you're reliant now on something that they need to do to prove that you are lovable in order for you to give yourself permission to feel something you could have felt literally anyway without them. And then the avoidant is sort of the opposite. But really they both stem from the same thing, right? Because like, and that's what's so interesting to me is like avoidant and anxious both have the same fear. They both have the same wound, the same, it's rooted in the same thing, which is a fear of abandonment and a fear of not feeling lovable from that abandonment. And there's just different methods or ways of like feeling safe from that wound. So like the anxious, like I said, needs validation, seeks love, seeks attention. And the avoidant will do the opposite. They will keep everyone at arm's length. They will let nobody in, because if they can do that, then there's never a chance to feel unlovable or to feel rejected. And neither of these are beneficial. And I think that's really the key here is like, if you do actually, if we want to actually move into like a secure state, like not even just within relationships, but like I think in general, like into a secure state, instead of being so dependent on like external circumstances, like we need to learn to be able to generate that within ourselves. And I think that's such a hard thing, not because it's actually hard. I think it's actually a really, really simple thing to do, but like doing it in practice, I think is a totally different thing, because literally so much of like our programming and our culture doesn't teach us to do this. Like even if we look at like, I don't know, like demonstrations of, you know, any sort of like relationships, even like romance novels or like movies, like the way it's always weaved really cultivates like this avoidant sort of anxious dynamic, I would say. Like, and I think there's like pieces where like secure relationships are demonstrated, but I don't think they're quite as like beautiful or tragic. So who really wants to watch that? You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I have experienced, is like there's even a part of me that's like, okay, well maybe like a secure healthy relationship is boring, you know what I mean? And like not gonna lie to you, a piece of me still does very much believe that like there has to be like some sort of like uneasiness or chaos in a relationship in order for it to be heated and like have chemistry and be dynamic. And I think part of that is because I think you have like hyper individuality when you have like more toxic relationships, like the sort of like cat and mouse type dynamic. And I think individuality cultivates like more sexual tension in my experience. So when you're like, and I don't know, this is just when I'm speaking from experience. Like I'm not saying it couldn't be different or it isn't different. I'm just moving through this and like sharing kind of my observations until this point, like things I've directly experienced. Like I'm very hopeful and pretty confident that like there are other options, and like there's so many different types of people and types of ways to connect with people, and like so many different connections we can have, and that can, you know, even change us. Like I think being in relationships with different people even alters us, you know what I mean? Like it's, yeah, so it can always change, but in my experience, like I feel like there tends to be like less romance or like sexual chemistry when individuals are truly healthy and unified. Yeah, so that's just sort of where I'm at, and I don't think that's like a good thing, obviously. So that's still something I'm kind of like working through, because obviously like I think we all want a healthy, secure relationship, but we also want like that chemistry and that romance and like that story. And so it's like, how do you kind of merge these two things, and is it even possible to do that? Because like I'm sure so many of us have experienced both. Maybe not, you know, maybe you've only experienced one or the other. I've personally experienced both. I've experienced like very toxic, like cat and mouse type vibe, but it's like there's a lot of heat and a lot of chemistry, and it's exciting and it's a rush. It's like it's a roller coaster, you know what I mean? And then I've also experienced like that very safe love where there was just like there was no risk. Like I understood where we stood. Like I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't like, I felt safe and I felt secure, and that was a really good thing and a really healing thing, and it was a really stable dynamic, but there was no rush to it. You know what I mean? There wasn't that chemistry that I think so many of us also crave. So it's like, I think we're kind of left sitting here like wondering kind of which path to take, and like I don't know. I'm personally trying to find kind of a hybrid of both, and I don't know if it's out there. I don't know if it's possible, but we're gonna go with yes, because yeah. But anyway, I do want to talk a little bit more about like setting boundaries, and I think this kind of gets preached a lot in like the anxious attachment community, because obviously like anxious style people, I think, outwardly struggle with this the most, like because they're constantly like tuned to the energy and the frame of other people. But like I think avoidance can have this too. Maybe that's just because I've been both. So there's like a lot of overlap there, but I want to say that like I think this applies to everyone, and I think everyone has sort of can end up in a situation like this and would benefit from just like understanding how to set boundaries. And I think for so long I didn't really like understand what that meant. Like I was there was all this like talk on the internet about people setting boundaries and blah, blah blah. And I was like, and I just kind of pictured like that being like a firm conversation with people. And I was like, okay, like whatever. I just kind of like brushed off. I thought it was kind of stupid. I'm not gonna lie. And I don't know. Like I think I've come to like a deeper understanding of it recently, which is like even beyond like conversations. I think it can certainly include that, but for me, like so much of like boundaries has to do with like energy, because like I can definitely find myself like being out of my body and like tuned to other people. Like when somebody's like on my mind a lot or like pedestalized in some way, like kind of like that limerent mode of operation, like I'm very much out of my body and like connected to this person instead of being like grounded within my own vessel and with my own frame. And I think that state is very much a sign of weak boundaries. And so that's one of the things I'm moving through now is like learning how, and that's not a conversation. Like sometimes these people I might not even be like in conversation with, or maybe they're not present, or like it's not like a even a direct interaction necessarily. It's like within myself. And so I think that's a big part of like boundaries, is like so much of boundaries I think is like energetic and like nonverbal. And I don't know if that's really talked about enough, but I feel like that's such a key thing, at least for me, because it's one thing to have a conversation with a person and to be firm and stand up for yourself, but it's a whole nother thing to know like, hey, like, when I'm by myself or when I'm out and about, like you kind of do need to like shield yourself from that in a way, because like people, and this might be like a little bit like esoteric and like energetic, so if you're not into this, like it's fine, I guess. Just like look at it psychologically is kind of what I always say, but like because I think it still applies like really no matter what you believe. But like I think we do pass each other energy, and like if you don't have firm boundaries and you're not firmly in your vessel, like you can give people access to you, you know what I mean, in a way, and allow people to influence your current state by like always being on your mind and like always being present. And I think like Aaron Dowdy talks about this a lot too, which has been helpful for me kind of through this process. So check him out if you're not familiar. Like a lot of his like no contact videos are helpful. He has something called the frame technique, which is basically what I'm talking about. Like if you are feeling like someone's always on your mind, or like you're feeling kind of fearful or like unsafe or like tuned to them, just like overall like not in your body and like not in your own frame, like one of the things that can be really helpful, I think, is so different from so much of what we talk about in like the energy community and the spiritual community. Like so much of it is like dismantling self and like unity and like connecting with others, but like this is a really important thing if you want to operate within reality and like within 3D, is like learning how to actually reestablish separation when it's healthy and when it's necessary. So I think it's really easy, especially if you're like empathetic, to like flow into other people and like take on other people's things and like not really understand the boundary, the physical boundary between you and other people. So yeah, I think that can be really helpful to kind of bring into your regular practice, is like, if even if you're kind of, and this might dovetail with like actually setting boundaries with people and like having expectations and like having standards in your life, like part of that also comes back to you and being like, okay, like no, I'm not going to, this person is not allowed to enter my energy, my space. I'm not allowed to tune to them. You know what I mean? Like I think that's really a key part too, is like bringing it back to yourself and just learning how to actually set those rules and that foundation within yourself. So yeah, I don't know, just kind of a quick chat. I'm really, really, really curious to know kind of what you guys think and if this resonated with you or if this makes sense. So yeah, leave a comment below, give me a like, subscribe if you haven't already joined, and yeah, let me know what you think. I'm so curious to kind of talk about this more, and hear what you guys are experiencing on this journey, because I know we're all just going through it and experience different perspectives of it, and I think it's just so interesting. So I love you so much. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.